What often happens is, if you're an executive, you're a leader, every year you're doing a refresh. You're like, okay, what is it that we need to visit? And so what happens is we have these strategic initiatives. We say, here are the things that we would like to see change in our business. Here are the things I'd like to see change in my home. And those strategic initiatives are typically based on something that we believe we need. The biggest mistake I see people make, I see executives make, is not looking at the environment, the shift in the environment, and saying, while those are the things that I believe that we need, given how fast things are moving in the 21st century. By the way, you have to fully understand the 21st century. You cannot have 20th century thinking in the 21st century if you're going to solve for 21st century problems. Somebody might say, well, I do get it. And I'll say, you don't get it if you don't understand Gen Z. You don't get it if you don't have someone from Gen Z directly working with you, directly in conversation with you. And if you're an executive leader, you can't be too busy to interact with them, because that's the incoming generation that is going to run your business. Most of us, we cut our teeth education-wise in the 20th century, which is why I believe many of us still have 20th century thinking.
If you want to be about it, come on, let's talk about it. Change up the things you see. Open your mind to possibilities. Find your power, passion, and your purpose. You know it's time for you to walk in greatness. Let's murder mediocrity. Slay your goals, live out your dreams. Right now. Inspirational perspective. Open your mind to a better life. It's time to live your dream. Your purpose now. Inspirational perspective. Let's slay your goals.
The other thing that I've been thinking a lot about, and it's really been in my space, partly because I've put it there intentionally, is AI and how fast technology is moving. And one of the things that my team and we've been doing over the last few months is really beating the drum with executives in corporate America around, how this technological move is about to impact their businesses. Either if they're willing to adapt and shift up what's happening in a great way, or if they're too busy to adapt in a negative way. And in thinking about this, I think it draws a correlation to part of what we talked about over the last few weeks with going to the next level, where it is difficult to pause and to really think about, okay, what is it that I should be doing? How should I be changing my normal routine to support me in preparing for the future? One of the things that we talked about, we opened up the next level with the awakening. Because in order to go to the next level, you have to be awakened. And then part 2 of that was the growth phase. So when I awaken and I say, oh, there's more that I need to do, there's something I need to take on, then I go through a growth phase. And it's not always comfortable. I was sharing with Ide my own journey and, just spending time, investing my time in learning artificial intelligence at a deeper level. So I'm not just a user, but a practitioner, someone that can be considered an expert to support leaders like myself moving forward in the future. And it ain't always, there's disappointment, like you're like, man, yesterday after they finished up the course, I couldn't figure out, I'm like, man, I can't get my flow to work, my automation flow to work. So I sat there kind of scratching my head for it until I got it working. It's uncomfortable, man. But what it leads to is the bloom where you're actually on the next level. You've created something that you can consistently hit on a routine basis around your goals. So that's the idea, but it's not easy, and it's not it's not a phase that we want to go through continually. I think often many of us will go through it once or twice in our lives, and we go, okay, hopefully that's good enough. But to continually put yourself through that type of rigor to ensure that you're playing a high-level game is not the easiest thing to do. Then we talked about being wired to win, the psychology of success, and in part 1, I talked about the importance of guarding your mind. Who's the watchman? Who's watching, what goes into your mind's eye via inputs, what you watch, what you listen to, even what we eat. What are your inputs? Because your inputs become your outputs. And then we talked about part 2 last week. And that was, okay, so then once I develop these inputs, what are my systems? Do I have systems around my inputs? Do I have a routine around my inputs that are creating habits? And are those habits aligned with the identity that I envision for my life? The identity that has been given to me through God's purpose for my life.
God puts people in people's lives for a reason. And the day that I had called you and you were trying to talk to me, and I don't know what went on, and individuals made their comments. No, you said no. So I need your help this morning because I'm 73 years old. And I have lived this experience that we call America or in pursuit of the American dream. And I served this country not because I joined, because I didn't have a choice. And when I came back and they told me that I was a killer, and I asked who taught me how to do these things, these things that were taught, command and control, how you go about a warfare, are they algorithms in which they use on today? And you can't get a person to understand this and realize this because no matter how you tell them, go back and it will show you where it is today. If it had not been for the old, there could never be any new. If we go back and look at the black and white and look at the actors and not what they're saying, you'll see the actors of today. And my point is, I need your help, man. Because, see, before all hell breaks out, there's a moment when you begin to ask yourself, who are you? What are you?
I think the biggest question that when we're challenged in any type of way as human beings, especially as men, the biggest question typically is around who am I? And when we don't have an answer to that question, it can feel like being in a hell because it's quintessential to our existence overall. So who are you? And who were you created to be at your fullest potential? And that's in the presence of the darkness. And so what I did here is that you're battling a darkness. We all are. And what happens is often we ignore that darkness or we justify that darkness in some capacity. And when we ignore it, we overlook the fact that shadow has an impact. That shadow has a consequence. And we all have shadows. I have a shadow. Every human being has a shadow. The pastor in the pulpit has a shadow. And if I'm not clear on what that shadow is, there can be consequences. So who am I? And in the fullness of my polarity, from the purpose that I'm looking to bring and how I support people and help people and the light that I'm so willing to talk about, but also who am I in terms of the darkness that I may hide, that I may be ashamed of, that I'm embarrassed of, that sometimes when I act in that way from the darkness, I justify, if I can, or I'm ashamed of. Who am I? And then that leads into a bigger question of, in the lightness and darkness that I bring to my life, why am I alive? Like, why did the Creator allow me to live in both what I bring that I'm proud of, that I'm willing to talk about, and also in what I've done that I'm not proud of? and the darkness and maybe how I've hurt people and hurt other human beings. Why am I alive? Why me? And so this is why I said the big question is around purpose, because you are here for a reason. And I don't believe age matters at all. We can distinguish our purpose and we can take ourselves to the next level at any given time of our life. And what I believe happens is when I do not know my purpose, then I am typically living in the pursuit of happiness, right? Go to that movie, The Pursuit of Happiness. I believe one of the reasons that movie resonates with so many of us is because that becomes, when I don't know my life's purpose, then my purpose is in pursuit of happiness. Now, here's the problem with that. Happiness is temporary. I opened the show, kind of chuckling about the people in line at the dispensary this morning. I mean, there was a line around the block. Right? It was like around the corner. And I'm sure many of them are willing. It's not that cold outside, so it's not like they're uncomfortable. I'm sure they're chatting it up, and some of them going to smoke together and be friends. But all of that is in pursuit of happiness. But here's the thing. That high is going to come down. Monday morning we'll be here. And they have to deal with the reality of their lives. That pursuit of happiness this morning is only temporary. And what happens is when my life is defined by a pursuit of happiness, it also is defined by tragedy. Because anything that gets in the way of that happiness I'm going to struggle with. And this is why I say purpose is the answer. Because purpose is permanent. My happiness, my overall satisfaction with my life, all those things will always be on some type of, scale, up and down, up and down. And somebody might be looking from the outside in and say, this guy should always be happy. But they don't understand going back to the light and the darkness that we all struggle with. Whether it's an argument with a spouse, you could just be under a cloud for whatever reasons, fully blessed and under a cloud. And if my pursuit is happiness, and it's only temporary, then I'm putting too much stock in my relationship with my wife. I'm putting too much stock in how I feel and my health. I'm putting too much stock in what happens at the workplace. I'm putting too much stock in things that just don't matter and things that are volatile. And when my stock is in my purpose, it's not about how I feel. It's about the commitment to purpose. No matter what, I am striving for something consistent that the Creator, that God Himself put in place for me that I'm supposed to attain. And so when I'm living a life that is defined by purposeful meaning, then it's no longer about happiness. It's about impact. And so my question to you today, Tommy, is you have something to give. And how does that make an impact? And whatever pain you're feeling, brother, whatever pain that you are feeling this morning, it's not about making the pain go away, because we go through cycles as human beings. That is a part of life. But I do believe that pain and that happiness that we have at different times is always pushing us or pulling us or directing us towards the impact that we are supposed to make. And my big question is, what impact are you supposed to make? Is it on other veterans? Is it on young men? Is it what is that impact? Who are you supposed to be mentoring? Who are you supposed to be sharing these stories with? That as you do that, you will begin to really step into the promise of purpose. And the promise of purpose is peace.
What do you think about AI and students at school and schoolwork? Mm-hmm. Do you think that would be an advantage, or how do you feel about that? You think the learning would continue, or it would just be a shortcut to learning?
The deeper you get into the benefits that it provides, the smarter you have to be. And if you don't have the ability to critically think, you can only go so far. And so what I'm finding is, I was sharing this with Ide, because what I'm finding, even in the fellowship that I'm a part of, where there are a couple of hundred of us, all like really beginning all over the world, by the way, globally, who are beginning to like really get into the depths of like how AI can automate things and do workforce, et cetera. In order for that to be set up, there's a certain level of critical thinking that you have to be able to actually think through, how do I want these workflows to happen? But not only that, but you have to understand some not deep level coding, but high level coding, and be able to correlate different things to make whatever flow that you're automating actually work. I'm gonna give you an example. Yesterday, after the class, I was trying to go back and do everything I saw the instructor do. And I was having a hard time because I kept getting the error. So I had to go through my workflow and read each one and pay attention to what code did I put in. Does that prompt correlate with the next? And then finally, about an hour later, I hit enter, boom, I saw green and it started working. And so I do think that it's going to be important that parents, no matter how education changes, are doing everything they can to put their children in spaces where they have to critically think. Now, here's the last thing I'll say about this, Robert, and I'd love to hear what your response is. I am not a big fan of the current education system anyway. I believe the current education system has been set up to produce individuals who do not critically think, more so individuals who are looking for a job, looking to place themselves as cogs in a wheel for large corporations, or sometimes even small corporations, right? But not to critically think about the things that actually matter to them in life. What are the things that actually matter in life? Well, you go through 12 years of schooling, like we're mandatory 12 years of schooling, and not once do they teach you how to balance a checkbook. You go through 12 years of schooling, not once do they teach you about interest and compound interest and how to ensure that when you retire, you actually have, something to lean on. They don't teach you what I believe are real life lessons. So 12 years of schooling, and our young people walk away with basically not knowing anything, because it was all memorization for exams. And even now, many of us, if I were to ask you, do you understand the trigonometry you took in high school? Can you still divide a cosine against a sine? And what angle would that produce? Most folks will look at you like, I have no idea what you're talking about, because we memorized it. We memorized it, and so we cannot apply it to our lives. And so I don't believe that AI is going to hurt us any further. The education system that's been set up is already hurting us. What I do believe is it can hurt us faster. The last thing that's been on my mind, and we had some conversation about this in the first hour, is, artificial intelligence and how fast it's moving. Been spending a lot of time learning and becoming a practitioner of that technology. And I want to talk about a couple of things here. I want to cover part of what we've been doing with executives, because I think it runs parallel to what I'm finding for most of us in our lives when it comes to some level of development. So let me explain the challenge right now that I see with executive leaders. And by the way, when I say executive leaders, if you're a small business CEO, I'm talking about you too. Okay. If you're a Fortune 500 CEO, I'm talking about you too. If you're a C-suite leader or at the executive level in the Fortune 1000, I'm talking to you. So here's what I'm saying. We all are very clear that 2022 marked a shift in how technology works in our lives. With OpenAI coming out, the one that I think most of us know is Chat GPT. Like, we are very, very clear that that is moving itself forward. But here's what's happened. For those of us that are pretty busy and we've been, kind of moving. And by the way, when I say pretty busy, you're busy because you're successful. So you're maintaining the current level of success, or you're running your business and you're working to maintain the current level of success while you also go after your strategic goals, those strategic initiatives. What often happens is, if you're an executive, you're a leader, every year you're doing a refresh. You're like, okay, what is it that we need to visit? And part of how we think about those things as executives in the workplace is, and I think this runs parallel to everyone listening. So even if you're not an executive in corporate America, I want you to listen to this because you do run your household. You are the CEO of your household and you are the CEO of your life. And so what happens is we have these strategic initiatives. We say, here are the things that we would like to see change in our business. Here are the things I'd like to see change in my home. And those strategic initiatives are typically based on something that we believe we need. The biggest mistake I see people make, I see executives make, is not looking at the environment, the shift in the environment, and saying, while those are the things that I believe that we need, given how fast things are moving in the 21st century. By the way, you have to fully understand the 21st century. You cannot have 20th century thinking in the 21st century if you're going to solve for 21st century problems. And what I find is most leaders aren't really clear about the 21st century either. Like, everything that's changed and how it's transforming right in front of us. Let me say, because somebody might say, well, I do get it. And I'll say, you don't get it if you don't understand Gen Z. You don't get it if you don't have someone from Gen Z directly working with you, directly in conversation with you. And if you're an executive leader, you can't be too busy to interact with them because that's the incoming generation that is going to run your business, right? So put a little pause around, a little quote around that. We can come back to that later. So 21st century. So most of us really don't understand the time in which we live. But let me give you kind of a real quick overview, right? Anyone who's close to my age or older, like, we remember the 1990s. We remember Y2K and the idea that all the computers were going to mess up and glitch when we went from 1999 to 2000. Like, that was a whole thing. Like, there was fear around that, generated around that. You remember that. That's the 20th century. Most of us, we cut our teeth education-wise in the 20th century, which is why I believe many of us still have 20th century thinking. All right, so now fast forward 2025, 24 years into 21st century. And so much has changed that I think we lose track of it. We went from flip phones to smartphones. Insert BlackBerry in there that basically won quick and fell fast, right, for a lot of different reasons. And then came the iPhone. How did you feel about that when it first came out? How did you feel about social media when it first came out? How did you feel about email when it first came out? Because all these things, although email came out at the end of the 20th century, all these things are define what the 21st century is, right? Then let's talk about artificial intelligence, Chat GPT. Like, what is your level of proficiency with that as a leader, as an executive leader? And I believe that executives, because we're leading businesses, CEOs, because we're leading businesses, we cannot just afford to be users. We have to be practitioner. What's a practitioner? A practitioner is someone who understands how to deploy this technology into their business and what should be deployed, when it should be deployed, and not always the how, but you should have some high-level knowledge of how it can be deployed as well. Most of us don't have it because we are too busy surviving in our business. So busy surviving in our business, we aren't looking up to see the chasm that is basically on the other side of the cliff that most folks are going to run off of in their businesses. I'm telling you what's about to happen. Like, run right off the cliff, not because you had to, but because you didn't look up, pause, and say, wait a second, there's another direction that will solidify my business, solidify our organization going into the next decade. And that is artificial intelligence. And it's not just the deployment of it in terms of how you use it with email, productivity, etc. It is understanding it and pausing, strategically pausing to learn everything that you can about it so you can take yourself and the organization to the next level. One of the things that I teach executives is the 80-20 rule. And the 80-20 rule comes from Pareto's law. And, matter of fact, I'm going to pull up something here so I can be very clear about this, right? But the 80-20 rule comes from Pareto's law. And, Pareto's principle, Pareto's principle. Now, whenever I talk about principles and laws, one of the things that I think is really important is that we understand that every principle and every law comes from the Creator himself. I think it's really important to understand that, okay? So here's high level how Pareto's principle, the 80-20 rule, works. 20% of your effort will always equal 80% of your outcome. And the 80-20 rule is a phenomenon that's all around us. In fact, you can see it in population. 20% of the people that live in the United States of America live in rural areas. 80% of the people that live in the United States of America live in urban areas. And it's not just the United States. It is the same way in Great Britain. It is the same way in Russia. It is the same way everywhere around the world. You will see this 80-20 phenomenon take place everywhere around you. In fact, most of us wear 20% of our clothes. The other 80% is hanging up, waiting for a special occasion, right? Like you got go-to outfits every week that you're wearing. You wear 20% of your clothes. You're wearing down 20% of the pathway in your home. In fact, a gas engine, combustible engine, is only using 20% of the fuel. The rest of it's getting burned off. This is, it cost me $100 to fill my tank. Well, only $20 of that actually went to propelling the car forward. The rest of it was burned off in exhaust and things like that, right? So we see this principle taking place in every facet of life. Every facet of life. Now, where am I going here? Part of the idea, so we talked about going to the next level in the psychology of success. Part of the idea is that I'm always investing 20% of my time, right? If 20% of my effort equals 80% of my outcomes, then really how I can think about my time is what is the 20% that I'm working on in my business that impacts 80% of my business? That I'm not going to change. That's something that, one, as if I'm an executive and leader, or I'm running a household, I need to figure out what those things are because they are non-negotiable. But it also means that there's 80% that probably doesn't really need to be done or doesn't need to be done by you, right? But we're doing it because we have the wrong habits. We're busy doing things that don't really matter to our lives and to our businesses, right? But it feels like, we get, it's an easy task, like, putting everything in the dishwasher and hitting go, right? We get that dopamine hit. I just did something. But does that really matter to your life overall, right? Even from a business perspective, okay, I had those 3 big meetings with my team, but do they really matter to the business? Like, if those meetings didn't happen, would the business shut down? And if the answer is no, then I should be rethinking those meetings. Like, I should be rethinking whether or not we should have those meetings. So 20% of your effort equals 80% of your outcome. So the idea is that I'm investing 20% of my time into understanding and strategically thinking about my business. So if I'm an executive and I don't have 20% carved out, 20% of my time carved out for strategy, that means that I'm flying blind. If I'm a leader, if I'm a small business owner, and I don't have 20% of my time carved out for strategy, I'm in trouble. That means that I could be driving really quickly into a brick wall. Really, really fast into a brick wall because I don't have time to look up. Because strategy is actually looking up, right? You know, I'm doing work, actually looking up and surveying the distance saying, okay, based on what I see, how should I be thinking about the next actions I'm going to take? Not just this week, but also throughout the month, over the next quarter, but also this year. And also thinking about, based on what I see, how do I change my 3-year plan? You remember we used to do 5-year plans? Like, honestly, I think now they should just be 2-year plans. Like my 2-year plan. Like, how am I changing all of that based on what I see? And I'm constantly re-steering the organization based on what I see when I'm going through strategy time. So what does 20% look like in real life? 1 day. So if I work a 5-day work week, I should be spending 1 day on strategy. If I work 40 hours a week, 20% of that is 8 hours, which means 8 hours should be dedicated to strategy. And if it's not dedicated to strategy, this is why, even when you're listening to this, it's hard to comprehend because most folks are thinking, how could I ever? And if you're so busy throughout the week that you can't even wrap your mind around giving yourself 4 hours of strategy time, that is an indicator that you are likely about to run into a brick wall strategically, because you're not adjusting. You're not real time adjusting to the environment around you. And by the way, like, look at how fast things are changing. All we have to do is look at the last 3 weeks. You go look at Wall Street Journal article headlines for the last 3 weeks, and all you see is change, 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 more change, change, change back. Oh, nope, repeat that change. Nope, 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 change it back. Change, change, change. And so if you're not real-time adjusting in your business and your life for what's happening around you, then you're in trouble. So let's bring this back to AI. Let's bring this back to the AI conversation. I believe that AI is going to fundamentally change our lives, whether you like it or not, whether you believe in it or not, whether you're scared of it or not. It doesn't really matter. It's going to fundamentally change our lives. And if you are not investing for something that is going to fundamentally change how we live, if you're not investing 20% of your time into understanding and strategically applying AI to dramatically improve the 80% of your outcomes, you're going to be behind. So, Kimberly Clark, they were founded in 1872. This is a really good example of a company that strategically shifted in the same way that I'm asking you all to do. All right. And let's clip this one for executives in particular, right? Because I think any executive watching, I really want you to hear me on this one. Kimberly Clark, right? They started back in 1872. They were founded in Wisconsin by 4 men. You can imagine their last names, Kimberly Clark and 2 other brothers whose names weren't as easy to make into a company name. So, they chose Kimberly Clark. All right. So this company, when they first started, they initially produced newsprint and paper. So Kimberly Clark was a paper company. So newspapers and paper overall, that's what they did, right? And in 1995, Kimberly Clark began realizing, like, man, we need to diversify. Now, actually, no, they merged in 1995. Before 1995, look this up for me real quick. They began diversifying into other paper products. And they began diversifying into other paper products because they began to realize in 1990s was about the time when email came out and all that. That was the right time to merge. But even a little bit before that, they began to realize like people aren't using as much paper as they used to with word processors. So they saw a slight decline in paper use, right? And these executives who were being strategic, what the typical thing is to fight for more market share, right? That's what we've been trained to do. How do I sell more paper? What these executives said is, well, should we be fighting for more market share or should we be pivoting completely? And so they pivoted. And so they moved into things like tissues, paper towels, and sanitary napkins. It was 95. Okay. They moved into things like tissues, paper towels, and sanitary napkins. Kotex, by the way, for the ladies, that, you know, they went from producing papers and newspapers to producing other things with what they had, they could make in the factory, you know, paper towel, things like that. And they merged with Scott Paper to become a wider range market to create a broader product range and a larger market presence around paper. So a paper company that started with paper and newspapers, they were able to, because they were being strategic, right, creating time for strategy, they were able to actually see what was happening before it happened. Because 1995, imagine if they were still trying to produce paper, right? This is right around the time of email. They were like, nope, not going to work. Let's combine forces with someone else, right? And change our product lineup to tissue, paper towels, things like that, so we can stay relevant. I'm going to tell you something. Today, you may be selling a service that you may not sell tomorrow because the service that you're selling today is no longer needed. And that's okay. That's not failure. That's pivoting. That's going to the next level. You look at Kimberly Clark. I say Kimberly Clark went to the next level. It was either go to the next level or die. You make the choice. But these are all, here's another thing, real like Kimberly Clark, 1985, the company operated its own paper mills around the world. Around the world for decades, but closed all of them closed now in 2012. Its recent annual revenues top 18 billion. Kimberly Clark is regularly listed among their Fortune 500 company, obviously 18 billion, 40,000 employees. Think about the employees. Here's the thing. I can even imagine the executives coming out saying, hey guys, we're no longer producing paper. We're going to be producing paper towels and tissue, etc. And the folks being like, what? I ain't signed up for that. Leadership is not comfortable. But guess what? Those employees still have their pensions. They're able to retire, right? You may not like me right now, but you'll love me later, right? That's strategic leadership. Same thing in a family. For the brothers listening, you may see something that your wife doesn't see. She may not like you right now, but she'll love you later, right? That's what matters. All right. There's a lot of analogies and parallels. I hope y'all were following, all from the 80-20 rule. So we had a call. Was it Gail? No. It was Robert who asked about education that got me talking about how I feel about our current education system. And then that kind of led to Gail sharing, her discontent as a teacher watching 8th graders walk the stage and graduate who can't read. This brought up the law of entropy for me. Everything tends towards disorder unless energy is added. So everything around you will move towards disorder unless intention is added. I changed it a little bit there, but intention is energy, right? Everything will move towards disorder unless intention is added. So in science, entropy refers to the measure of disorder or randomness in a system. And right now, I really want you to put this in the context of our community, okay? Because this is like what we see happening right in front of us is a matter of the law. It's the matter of the law. And so in science, entropy refers to the measure of disorder or randomness in a system. You can think of our community as its own system. Most communities operate in systems. Many of them have rituals, like we have rituals. You already know in our community that if you show up to a restaurant this afternoon without reservations, you're going to be waiting a long time, right? That's not even branded. Like, it's a ritual. We know what goes on Easter Sunday in our community. So we have patterns and rituals and routines. So over time, without intentional input or maintenance, things naturally move from order to disorder. So if there is not intentional input or maintenance, things will naturally move from order to disorder. Now, by the way, one of the big things that happened in our community is things in our community went from being privately funded, like Black Panther groups, churches, like putting things together for the community. And since it's Easter Sunday, I'm going to take it easy on the pastors and the churches. But, look up real quick the number of churches in Chicago per capita. Like the number of churches in Chicago. Because when you look at what's going on in our community, like if the church is there to serve the community, then should it be happening? Or have churches become so insular? What I mean by that is, so insulated that there's no intention put outside of the brick and mortar. Well, that's just a question I have, not an accusation. But, when we look at the law of entropy, there's been a lack of intention in our communities. There's been a lack of maintenance in our communities. So things naturally move from order to disorder, from structure to chaos. 4,000. So 4,000 churches in Chicago. 4,000 churches. So there are 4,000 churches for 2.6 million people, which means that every church could serve 1.5 churches could serve 1,000 residents. Okay, got you. Now you see where I'm going with this? Right. So then let's say we divide that 1.5. Let's take out the 1.5, right? And so that means for every church, 750 people are served. That math's right. Yeah, okay. So every church, 750 people. And I'm not putting it all on the churches, right? But I believe what we've done is we put it all on the government. And we get upset or this is why you got to get out and vote. And it's like, at what point will we begin to activate ourselves in our community? All right, so let's go back to the law of entropy. I want to put this in real life terms, okay? In your home, like if you don't clean your house, if you don't have a cleaning routine from your home, what's going to happen? You can move in and have it in perfect structure. Like it could be great. It won't last a week. The law of entropy states that unless there is some intention and maintenance, whatever is in order will move to disorder. In 1 week, a house will be filthy if it's being lived in and it's not being maintained. Okay? Now, let's go to the human body. The human body doesn't stay fit unless you continue to move and fuel it well. Fuel it with the fuel that it's built for. If you put fuel, perfect example. I drive a vehicle, I have to put 93 octane in it. If I start putting 85 octane, right, with high levels of ethanol in my vehicle, and it starts jumping on me and not accelerating quickly, how can I be confused? How can I be upset? I didn't put the proper fuel, right? So the body doesn't stay fit unless you continue to move it and fuel it well. You have to have some level of intentional input and maintenance for the body, period. Otherwise, you're going to get fat and not feel good. It's right. Am I mean for saying that, or is that just what it is? Right? The law of entropy in effect. Some folks will look you dead in your eye and say, I eat well. I'm looking at them. Okay. You get where I'm going? They will look you, oh, I eat well. On what planet? Same thing with mindset. Same thing with mindset. Your mindset doesn't stay sharp unless you keep feeding it the right thoughts and the right information. The law of entropy. Thank you for watching Inspirational Perspective. If you love this show and you want to see more content like this, you can go right here. And if you like this subject and you want to see much more content that we have available for you, just click the button here. As always, thanks for watching. Be sure to watch the show live, 7 a.m. every Sunday morning on WBON Radio, or you can catch it right here on YouTube or Facebook.com/Coach Liddell Harris. Be sure to hit that like button. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe so we can get more content just like this to you.